Imagine discovering that the person you trusted most had been hiding your future from you. That was my reality when I learned my stepmom had secretly kept my inheritance after my father passed away. She thought I was clueless, powerless, and too young to understand how wills worked. But what she didn't know was that her little scheme would backfire in the most satisfying way possible. Months later, I found myself holding the deed to the very house she was renting, her home, without her even knowing. And when she realized who her new landlord was, her face was priceless. My life changed the day my dad married Sandra. She came into our lives with a bright smile, endless compliments, and an almost rehearsed warmth that felt welcoming at first. I was 17 then, still raw from losing my mom years earlier, and I wanted to believe she could bring some light back into my dad's life. She never tried to replace my mother, and I appreciated that, but there was always a quiet edge to her kindness, as if she was measuring every interaction and subtly steering our household without anyone noticing. Dad adored her. He said she was a blessing, someone who helped him keep the house in order and handle the responsibilities he never liked dealing with: bills, taxes, insurance, and all the paperwork that made him sigh in frustration. She eagerly took over, always assuring us that she had everything under control. It felt convenient at the time, and I didn't think twice about it. I was busy with school, and Dad seemed happy letting her manage things he found tedious. Then, Dad got sick. Watching the strongest man I knew grow weaker each day was unbearable. I spent most of my time at the hospital, clinging to hope while Sandra handled everything else at home. She updated me in short, dismissive sentences whenever I asked about finances or the house. "Don't worry, it's all sorted," or "the lawyer already knows what to do." Her tone was final, as if asking too many questions would be inappropriate while Dad was fighting for his life. When Dad passed away, it felt like the air had been sucked out of my world. I was numb, moving through the funeral arrangements and condolences like a ghost. Sandra stayed composed, almost too composed, insisting she would take care of all the boring adult stuff so I could grieve. I trusted her. I wanted to believe she had our best interests at heart. But even in my fog of grief, I noticed the little things: phone calls she took in another room, letters she opened quickly and tucked away before I could read them, and the way she changed the subject whenever I mentioned Dad's will or estate. At the time, I told myself she was just being protective. I didn't yet realize that her secrecy wasn't kindness. It was the first warning sign of the betrayal that would change everything. The weeks after my father's funeral were a haze of grief, but as life crept back into a routine, I began to notice small things that didn't add up. Bills arrived with unfamiliar names, letters addressed to me seemed to disappear before I could open them, and whenever I asked about anything money-related, Sandra's responses were clipped and vague. "It's handled," she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. Grief can make you imagine shadows where there are none, but the feeling gnawed at me. One afternoon, while helping my Aunt Linda pack away some of Dad's old things, she casually asked, "So, have you talked to the lawyer about your inheritance yet? Your dad said he set aside something special for you." I froze, the box I was holding slipping slightly in my hands. "What inheritance?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Aunt Linda frowned. You didn't know? He told me he made sure you'd be secure. A savings account and some assets, I think. The lawyer should have contacted you by now." A cold shiver ran down my spine. No one had contacted me. Sandra had never mentioned a thing about it. Suddenly, all those secret phone calls, the letters she quickly hid, and her insistence on handling everything felt sinister. My chest tightened with anger and confusion. Was she hiding something from me? That night, I confronted her casually, trying not to sound accusatory. "Hey, Aunt Linda mentioned something about Dad leaving me an inheritance. Did the lawyer say anything to you?" Sandra didn't flinch, but her smile was just a little too wide. "Oh, honey, that's nothing you need to worry about right now. I'm taking care of it. It's complicated paperwork, and you're so young. I'll let you know when it's all finalized." The way she said it made my blood boil. I wasn't a child anymore, and this was my father's legacy. But instead of arguing, I nodded, swallowing the rage that burned in my chest. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, a storm of betrayal and disbelief swirling inside me. By morning, I had made up my mind. If Sandra was hiding my inheritance, I needed proof. I wasn't going to be left in the dark any longer. Whatever secrets she thought she could bury, I was determined to uncover them, no matter what it took. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose burning through my chest. If Sandra thought she could brush me off forever, she was wrong. I started small, searching the house for anything that could give me answers. In the filing cabinet where my dad used to keep his paperwork, I found a mix of old utility bills and tax forms, but many of the most recent documents were missing. There were gaps where statements should have been, and I noticed subtle signs of tampering, envelopes opened and resealed, dates that didn't align. It was as if Sandra had carefully curated what I could see. Next, I dug into my email and online banking accounts. I remembered that my father had once added me as a secondary account holder to a savings account for emergencies. When I logged in, my heart sank. The account had been wiped clean weeks after his death. I couldn't find any trace of where the funds had gone. Even my attempts to check the mailbox early were fruitless. Sandra seemed to snatch up the mail before I could touch it. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to go straight to the source. Dad's lawyer, Mr. Reynolds. I made an appointment under the pretense of needing closure, and he welcomed me with a sympathetic smile. After some small talk, I finally blurted out, "I need to know about my dad's will. Did he leave me anything?" Mr. Reynolds hesitated, scanning my face before pulling a folder from his desk. "Your father was very clear," he said. "He wanted you to be secure. There's a trust in your name, as well as a sum of cash and some bonds. You should have been contacted weeks ago." My stomach twisted. "I wasn't." His eyebrows knit together. "That's odd. According to our records, all communications went to your home address. Sandra signed the acknowledgement forms as your guardian since you were under 21. It hit me like a punch. She had intercepted everything. Letters, updates, and possibly even access to the funds. While I sat drowning in grief, she was quietly positioning herself as the gatekeeper to my own inheritance. Walking out of the lawyer's office, the betrayal burned hotter than ever. To Sandra, I wasn't family. I was an inconvenience, a kid she could manipulate until she squeezed out what she wanted. The thought that she could smile in my face while stealing my father's last gift to me made my chest ache with rage. But anger wasn't enough. Confronting her without evidence or a plan would only make her double down. I needed to be smarter. That day, I made a silent vow. I would play along, let her think I was naive, and quietly gather everything I needed. She had stolen my trust, but she would never see what was coming next. The drive back from Mr. Reynolds's office was a blur of rage and clarity. By the time I reached home, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Sandra control a single penny of what my father left me. The next day, I returned to the lawyer's office, this time with a firm request. I wanted full access to my inheritance and for any future correspondence to go directly to me, not Sandra. Mr. Reynolds was sympathetic and promised he would file the necessary paperwork immediately. There were a few tense weeks of back and forth, signatures, and verifications, but eventually, the funds and assets that rightfully belonged to me were officially under my control. The first time I saw the full amount in my account, I felt a strange mix of grief and triumph. This was my father's final gesture of love, a safety net he had worked his whole life to provide me, and Sandra had nearly robbed me of it. I swore to myself that she would never touch a cent of it. While going through the list of assets with Mr. Reynolds, he casually mentioned something that stuck in my head. The house Sandra and my dad had been living in wasn't in her name. In fact, it was a long-term rental from a retired couple who had moved to another state. I sat back, stunned. All this time, she had acted like the queen of that house, controlling everything, and yet she didn't even own it. That's when the idea began to take shape. slowly at first, then with a thrill of inevitability. What if I bought the house? Not out of pettiness, but as a statement, as a way to reclaim my power. I pictured her face when she found out that the kid she tried to cheat now owned the very roof over her head. The thought sent a rush of satisfaction through me. I quietly reached out to the property owners. They were older and tired of managing a rental from afar. When I expressed interest in buying, they were immediately open to the conversation. I kept my involvement discreet, using my lawyer as the point of contact to avoid tipping Sandra off. Each step of the process, the negotiations, the paperwork, the inspections, felt like building a secret weapon. With every signature, the suspense grew. Sandra went on with her life, oblivious, while I was preparing a revelation that would turn her world upside down. Soon, I would hold the deed to the place she called home, and she wouldn't even see it coming. I still remember the first call I made to the property owner. Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs were an elderly couple living in Florida, and when I introduced myself as an interested buyer for their rental house, they were thrilled. They admitted they had been considering selling for a while, but hadn't found the right buyer. I told them I could pay in full, in cash, thanks to my inheritance, and that alone seemed to seal their interest. The next step was connecting with a local real estate agent to handle the process discreetly. I explained to the agent that confidentiality was key. No for sale sign, no communication through the rental address. Everything had to come to my private P.O. box or directly to Mr. Reynolds, my lawyer. If Sandra even caught a whisper of what I was doing, the entire plan would lose its impact. The agent agreed, noting that in quiet transactions like this, privacy wasn't unusual. The waiting period was excruciating. Every step took longer than I wanted. First came the property inspection, which I scheduled during a time I knew Sandra would be at her weekly book club. Then the appraisal, the title checks, and the legal paperwork that needed my signature in 3 different places. I spent days holding my breath, terrified something would go wrong. At any moment, I expected a text from Sandra asking, "Why is a stranger poking around the house?" But the call never came. During those weeks, I acted like nothing was happening. I smiled at her over dinner, nodded along as she bragged about how she was managing the house perfectly, and even thanked her for keeping things in order. It took everything in me not to laugh when she lectured me about responsibility while I was in the process of buying the very home she was renting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Reynolds called me into his office. He didn't say much, just slid an envelope across his desk with a grin. My hands shook as I pulled out the papers. There it was, the official deed to the house, my name printed clearly as the owner. I had done it. I left his office with the documents clutched to my chest, a mix of triumph and disbelief flooding through me. Sandra had no idea that her world had just shifted completely, and soon she would realize that the roof over her head now belonged to the very person she tried to cheat. The day the first rent payment was due felt like the climax of a long, secret performance. I had been waiting for this moment with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. As part of the sale, I had arranged for all rent correspondence to be redirected to me. I sent Sandra a polite, official-looking letter through the property manager, notifying her that the property had been sold to a new landlord and that rent should now be made payable to the new owner. I could almost picture her opening it, frowning in confusion, and maybe grumbling about the change. Sure enough, a week later, I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen. "Yes, I got your notice, but who is this new owner? I've been renting this place for years. I deserve to know." Her voice had that familiar sharpness, the one she used when she thought she was in control. I stood quietly at the bottom of the stairs, heart pounding, holding the envelope she'd be seeing soon, my name printed clearly on the deed copy inside. When I walked into the kitchen, she spun around, startled. "Do you know anything about this new landlord?" she demanded, waving the letter. "Yes," I said, letting a slow smile spread across my face. "I know exactly who it is." She blinked in confusion as I laid the envelope on the table and slid it toward her. "Open it," I said. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore it open, scanning the papers. I watched her face transform from curiosity to disbelief, then to sheer humiliation. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, in a strained whisper, she said, "You? You own this house?" I nodded. "Every brick, every window, every room. Paid in full with the inheritance you tried to keep from me." For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Her face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for an excuse, an explanation, anything to regain her footing. But there was nothing she could say. All her secrecy, all her manipulation, had led to this moment of poetic justice. I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. I didn't gloat, didn't yell. I didn't need to. Her shame said everything. Watching her realize that the very roof over her head now depended on the person she tried to cheat was a victory no words could match. After the shock wore off, Sandra finally found her voice. She stammered, trying to patch together an excuse. I wasn't trying to steal from you. I just thought you weren't ready to handle that kind of money. I was going to tell you eventually." Her words tumbled out quickly, dripping with a mix of guilt and desperation. I could almost see her scrambling to rewrite the story in her favor, to turn herself from a thief into a misunderstood caretaker. I kept my expression calm, refusing to let her see the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said evenly. "This isn't personal now. It's business. You live here, and I own the house. That's all there is to it." She gaped at me, clearly expecting a fight, maybe even forgiveness, but I offered neither. I wasn't interested in revenge through screaming or arguments. I wanted quiet, undeniable control. For years, she had acted like she ran my father's home, like I was just a guest in my own life. Now, she couldn't deny that her roof, her safety, her comfort, all depended on me. Over the following weeks, her demeanor changed completely. She avoided eye contact, spoke to me in clipped, careful sentences, and made sure rent was paid on time. Every check arrived with my name on it, and I couldn't help but feel the irony every time I deposited one. This wasn't about the money, it was about the shift in power, about knowing that the person who tried to erase my future was now helping to secure it. I often thought about my dad during those quiet evenings. He had trusted Sandra, maybe even loved her, but I believed he would have been proud of me for standing up for myself without sinking to her level. I learned that betrayal has a way of circling back on those who deal it. Karma doesn't need to shout or throw punches. Sometimes it just signs a deed and waits for the rent to arrive. And so, life moved on. Sandra stayed in the house, but every month, her payment came straight to me, the very person she had once dismissed as powerless. The victory wasn't loud, but it was complete. Sometimes, life serves justice without a single argument. My stepmom thought she could erase my future by hiding my inheritance, but all she really did was build the stage for her own humiliation. I didn't need to scream, fight, or beg. I just had to rise quietly, take control, and let the truth speak for itself. Now, every rent check she sends is a reminder that patience and perseverance are the ultimate revenge. Karma doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it simply holds the deed to your house.